What's going on, world? Peace and blessings. Appreciate you tuning in. Welcome back to Well Connected. Definitely got a dope episode in store today. Make sure you check out last week's episode, Black and Politically Independent. So, we keep on par. We're going to keep it politics as usual. And today, we're going to talk about a more neutralized topic, and that is the primary season. As you may or may not know, currently right now, we are in our Democratic and Republican primary season to see who will be the nominee for a 2024 national election. So today we're going to talk about both the Democratic side and Republican side, the different candidates, kind of what's going on right now, and some predictions and how the landscape is pushing. So let's get into it. So first we'll start with the Dems. It's a lot shorter side here. So as we know, we have our incumbent president, Joe Biden, who has given all indication that he was going to probably run for re-election coming up. Still hasn't like officially announced it, but that's pretty much what he's going on here. Okay, so Joe Biden is running for the election. And if you may or may not know, there are actually other candidates on the Democratic side, Mariane Williamson and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. If you may not know, from the news at least, it seems that Biden is the only candidate. Typically, the incumbent president generally kind of has the benefit of doubt, if you will, just of running again. However, there's been times when that president has been primaried as well. So as a collective whole right now, Democratic side, the Democratic National Convention and Committee, they're not planning on having a primary, meaning that they're not going to have debates with Biden. Now, in their mind, their logic is, well, Biden's going to be the nominee, so let's not waste our time by having these debates. You could argue that, well, Mariane Williamson or RFK Jr. aren't legitimately polling as a true, actual threat to Biden, so no need to have debates. Now, for myself, as a registered independent, as we established last episode, I'm kind of just turned off by this behavior by not having primaries for the Democratic Party. Because, even if Biden's going to be your nominee, okay, but he should have to talk about a plan and platform. You see, part of the problem is, in my opinion, is that in the 2020 election, Biden never really had a true platform. It was just take out Trump, get Trump out of office, but no means necessary. Necessary, right? That was the narrative for most people. And so, because of that, I'm like, all right, well, what about now? Because there's lots of campaign promises and things that Joe Biden said he would do that unfortunately did not happen. And so I do think as a president nominee, you should have to speak on those things, right? Speak on your record. To be fair, to be honest, let's see your mental health and your cognitive ability. 80 years old now, and I don't believe in ageism. I do think anybody can be sharp as a tool late in the game for sure. But he's definitely shown many times and occasions again where it seemed like some real cognitive slips. And I'm like, are we gonna keep pretending this is happening here? We're just always just sidestep this. I'm like, this man is like the leader of the free world. Maybe we should double check and make sure he's cool, run this back for another 4 term, where he might be 85 at the end of it. So again, I think for Biden, he should have to speak on his record. I think he should have to actually speak to other candidates and defend himself. He doesn't do that now. He doesn't do interviews. They kind of hide him like a puppet. So again, he's the president. And he's the incumbent for sure, as of right now. But the Democratic Party not having a primary is disheartening, because even for Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who's probably about 13-12% in most of the national polls of Biden, right? It's kind of low to the threshold. But he's someone who has had opposing views and things and is trying to bring a different opinion to the Democratic side and party. And the fact that we're limiting discussion, right? I think discussion is always good for new ideas. And even from an independent perspective, right? Someone like myself, who's a quote unquote swing voter, right? It's like, man, I would like to see what's the true vision of the Democratic Party. What's the narrative going to be? Are other opinions allowed in the Democratic Party? What's happening here, And by limiting that discourse, by limiting that dialogue, I think it's bad, because it's there should be ideas that Mariane Williamson and RFK Jr. both have that maybe Biden wants to adapt into his platform and campaign to try to unite and make people a possible Democratic campaign. Because reality is, look, even if somehow, some way Trump is a nominee again, I'll talk about that later in a second, the same whole Trump out by any means necessary isn't going to be as strong as before, because now Biden, you had a 4 years of a track record, and some people may see, well, actually, maybe you aren't necessarily the better option, right? Depending on the views on that. And so now having a primary, again, I think is something that's not as conducive, right? And then there's another third party candidate that people may not know is Dr. Cornel West, who's running on the Green Party. Now, I want to start by saying all respect and praise Dr. Cornel West, black man that has devoted entire adult life to the betterment of the black community through dialogue, academics, reasoning, factual objective evidence, social justice, and nothing but respect for him. And that's that. I'm just giving his flowers out. He's not a butt coming. That's my guy. Shout out to Dr. Cornel West. So run for the Green Party. So I know some people may think, oh, a third party. And I understand a lot of people may not resonate well with third-party candidates. They may feel that, oh, they're just taking away from other candidates. Oh, there's no chance of winning. Oh, vote for a third party, vote for Trump. You know, I heard all this narrative stuff before. But it turns out it actually isn't that simple. And I know that, again, part of something being so hyper-partisan is that whether you're a Democrat or Republican, in the day, like a lot of people are going to vote party lines. So they may not like the candidates. They may be critical of them. When it comes down to the meat and grizzle, they're going to vote for their party, right? And so I think at times people get very, I don't say arrogant, but like, oh, if you're not voting my side, you're basically an enemy, right? And essentially try to like just gaslight, bully, shame people for voting a third party. And you gotta understand, it doesn't work that way. Like for myself as an actual independent voter, if I don't think a Democrat or Republican is a good candidate or has a policy to benefit me or the black community, I'm not voting for him. Vote third party then. Like, you're not gonna shame or bully me to, you didn't vote my person. No, okay. I have a right to vote for someone just as much as you have a right to vote for somebody. This notion that you get to guilt and bully and shame me because I don't share the same ideology as you or because I'm not as partisan as you, I'm sorry. You may feel that way, that your candidate didn't win or that you won't vote for your candidate, but that's not how that works. You can't bully and shame people. As you got to realize, an independent voter, it's like, it's a turnoff. And I see especially the Democratic Party at times when it's like even though I'm an independent voter, I have voted Democrat before, right? For like the right candidate and stuff. Absolutely. Sure. They got policy, bet. I have voted before. But it's like, there's this notion if I challenge a candidate though, where this is pushback, if you challenge them and you think about voting third party and trying to, again, bully and shame somebody again and discredit them for having a different view and not voting for Joe Biden, it's disgusting and it's not going to work. And it pushes people away. It pushes people who are quote unquote independent and moderate to another side. So like that whole like arrogant vote for my person thing. And like a side note to that, I know especially because of the 2016 election and because of third party involvement with the Green Party, Dr. Jill Stein, and also as well you had with the Libertarian Party and with Gary Johnson. And a lot of people felt that Hillary Clinton lost because of the third party voting, but the reality is, even with all the Green Party votes and everything like that, Hillary Clinton still loses to Trump in the Electoral College. So quite frankly, it didn't make a difference. And if you want to talk about this fact that somehow like, even this past 2020 election, right? If the logic was, if you voted for a third party person, to say you're voting for Trump, because I want to vote for Biden. Yet somehow, some way, if I vote for a third party person, it wasn't a vote for Biden. Like I understand how logic works for a vote for one third party person to vote for Trump, but yet at the same time, not voting for Trump is somehow a vote for Trump. I didn't really get that. It doesn't really make sense. It's kind of like it's a gaslighting straw man argument. And the reason people get very short-sighted with that partisan element, if you look at 2016, especially, like Trump won the Electoral College, right? Like heavy. And I know Hillary won the popular vote, but again, she won heavy populated states, California, did really well in Florida, Texas did really well, New York. I say this is that the third highest vote getter, right, in the 2016 election was Gary Johnson, the libertarian, former Republican governor of New Mexico. Who do you think libertarian, right-wing Republican Gary Johnson took more votes from? Republican right-wing candidate Donald Trump, who libertarians would typically vote more Republican side, or left-wing Hillary Clinton? The reality is still more votes from Trump. And Trump still won, right? So again, to that point, it's like, yes, third-party people at some time like have different umbrellas, but like I think is that the problem is when people are so partisan, you're seeing it from a partisan perspective. That, well, if you don't for this party, you're not voting for my party. And it's like, again, from an actual independent, objective perspective, I'm telling you, like, for example, right, this upcoming election here, I'm not sure who I'm going to vote for yet. But like someone like Dr. Cornel West, right? I may not vote for him, right? Because I'm not sure what his policy stuff is, right? And to be fair and quite frank, do I think Dr. Cornel West has a chance of actually winning the primary? No. Do I have a chance of actually winning the presidency? Like, because it's a Green Party, winning the presidency? No, I don't think he actually has a chance because that's the way the big government works. However, right, he's a legit candidate. But I think sometimes the slippery slope is assuming, well, if I don't vote for Dr. Cornel West, that somehow that means automatically I'm going to vote for Joe Biden and Democrats. And that's not true. Like, that's the problem. Like, I'm not voting for Joe Biden. I'm be very straightforward when I say it. I'm not under zero circumstance. I didn't vote before, I'm not voting again, and I will talk about my podcast why. It's because of his past history and current history with systematic white supremacy and racism and the harm he's done to the black community. That's my opinion, that's my view, and I can give objective facts to back it up. But that's a straight up point to it, right? Like, I'm not voting for him. So, now that doesn't mean I'm voting for Trump or Republicans either at all. But at least not Biden I'm not voting for. Now, with that being said, though, right, again, just because I'm not voting third party, don't mean I'm voting Democrat. Like, y'all keep looking at it from a very partisan perspective. From an independent perspective, I'm going to vote for the best candidate I think has the best policy and represents me. That's where I'm at. Again, that's because I don't dive into the partisan element. And I'm not voting Democrat. I've never been a registered Democrat my entire life, ever. I've never been a registered Republican, ever. So I don't have a home, per se, in that regard, right? So now, does that mean that in other positions, in other election cycle as a whole, national, I won't vote for a Democrat candidate? No. It's not Biden. But that brings me to a point, though, right, about just as a whole, independent way of thinking, right, the primary element. So, again, we can bully and shame, be mad at third-party candidates all we want, but you understand, for third-party voters, I don't really care what you think and how you're upset and what you're mad. You're not going to gaslight me into voting for someone that doesn't represent me, not voting for someone who's a white supremacist, voting for someone who has failed policy. Like, no, I'm sorry. It ain't going down like that. But that's my perspective. And that brings me to which I think is going to happen, Democrat actual primary. You know, I just don't think Biden's going to be the candidate. Just not sure he's going to make it there. And that may be from indictments, what's going on, his dealings and everything like that, especially with his son and all those evidence in Ukraine pieces, to just the health and everything going forward. And plus the Democrats, like, that really we want to put out there. It may be. I think what may happen is that someone else is going to step in who's not here right now. That's someone I think maybe Gavin Newsom, governor of California. If you're paying attention, he's been doing a lot of kind of organic outreach across the country, going to kind of campaign trail, going to different states, talking to people, hearing their messages. I think for a Democrat, he, leader of California, again, one of the large states here in the country. He's younger, more energy. He could someone who could step in on the campaign trail, especially if Biden does not go. I've also heard about, Gretchen Whitmer, governor of Michigan, potentially as well for her maybe to step in, potential replacement, or be on a ticket for somebody as well. This will be very interesting to see what happens here, right? Even Gavin Newsom maybe gets on a ticket as a VP for Biden potentially. I'm not sure if Biden's going to let Kamala Harris again. I think that worked on the last cycle here. I don't think neither of them have really done anything to really uplift the profile in this several years so far here in her administration. We'll see what happens again. I mean, she's qualified for VP and everything. And even for herself, I don't think that she has shown enough as a VP to run for president in that role. So we'll see if Biden gets there. I think the problem is right now, everything is kind of held up on what happens on the Republican side, right? And even for Biden, I was talking to one of my colleagues earlier who is a progressive, and he was telling me how, for himself, he was kind of worried because Biden hasn't put a platform out at all yet, right? And it's like, well, what are you running on? And I think also as well to look at, like, again, I think people will unite for the nominee, but it's tough this time. It's not going to be as simple as before, where the whole get Trump out off by any means necessary, because a lot of progressives so far have been turned off by a lot of policies Biden has done, because they have been really more typical government and a lot of sometimes right-leaning policies and behavior. And so, we'll see where that takes us. But again, it kind of really depends on the Republican side, because I think they're trying to see, is Trump going to be a nominee or not, right? If Trump's a nominee, then Biden would essentially just run on, well, we got to get Trump out of office again. No means no type of thing, right? And that essentially would be the platform, which isn't a platform, but that's what they're run on, right? Hysteria, run on the fear, and those elements. If it's not Trump, it's somehow, again, it's DeSantis or someone else, then that changes everything completely. Because now it's like, oh, I can't just use the he's a criminal thing, or we have to get him out of office. Like, oh, I have to come with policy and debate and speak to people. And I'm like, yo, Biden, you want to give him, like, that's why I'm like, this. I think it's a mistake not having him do the primaries, quite frankly, get warmed up. Because I'm like, all right, you're going to throw him straight into national debates. You can't duck those. Those have to happen. So that brings me to the GOP here, right? As we know, Donald Trump is the front runner, former president, running again for the nominee. He's run away with it, right? It's not even close. He's in almost all polls. He's over 50% polling in almost every single poll. The next closest is Governor Ron Desantis of Florida, hitting about 13% in some of the polls here, but it's not even really close. Then you have Vivek Ramaswamy. You have Nikki Haley, former governor of South Carolina. You've got Senator Tim Scott from South Carolina as well. Former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie, and former Vice President Mike Pence. Right. So you had a Republican primary a couple weeks ago, right? And the largest takeaways from it is that, well, Trump's is going to be the nominee, even with these impending legal charges he's facing. It kind of seems like, unless, like, quite frankly, he's like convicted of something that like violates, I believe, like 14th Amendment, where he cannot run again for office, he's going to be the nominee. It's kind of crazy that way. He legitimately might be indicted. Like, I know right now they set it up for when I believe the trial in Georgia is going to be about after election, but like before Super Tuesday, I believe. Very interesting. Real quick on that, I'll say about Trump. Nobody's above the law whatsoever. Okay, if you did crimes, you gotta be held accountable, right? For sure. So no one's above the law. So that being said, right? Do I think there's some W smoke to some of these things? Sure. Okay, I think, especially election fraud stuff, Trump brought a lot upon himself, to be honest. I'll do a whole show on that in the future about there was no election fraud, okay? For the national level, no, it wasn't. He lost. Same thing with there was no Russian collusion 2016. He lost, okay? Conspiracy theories. With that being said, though, right? I do think that the timing of some of these charges, especially like in Georgia and these areas, I do think it's politically motivated. I do think it's not a coincidence that they put these charges now, so it just happened that the trial will start for a Super Tuesday for election season. Like, all these things all occurred like back in like 2020, like 2019, 2020, right? Excuse me, like 20 and moving. So for several years, a lot of stuff could have been brought up. It's timing. Now that he comes out in a position for it to happen, sure. But I do think it's a slippery slope for the Department of Justice. I do think this stuff is politically motivated. Ironically, though, Trump, when running in 2016, was all about Hillary Clinton. I'm going to lock her up. And I get in office, the first thing I'm going to do is hire a special prosecution to take her down. But never happened. It was Cap. But it's like, well, bro, dang, they kind of doing the same thing to you now. So, I don't know. It's kind of interesting how that worked out there. But then Trump was going to be the nominee, though, more than likely. Now, again, if he's not, if somehow, it's only going to be really if some legal stuff happens. That's quite frankly what's going to happen. Ron Desantis, governor of Florida, who had a lot of promise when he kicked off his campaign. A lot of people thought, he could be legit, good alternative to Trump because, he wasn't as controversial. At least what he said things was a lot better, political temperament, right? More typical governor, especially held office before. And especially for the Republican Party, for them, they want to get back to quote-unquote normalcy, right? In some regards, Trump hijacked the Republican Party. And that's where MAGA came out of. And that's why you can understand from a self-independent perspective, who has Republican conservative friends, who check stuff on their sides for social media. I can say, like, there's now a growing divide, though, right? There's a lot of people who are former MAGA that got off the Trump train, right, and now on the DeSantis train. Some people who are really large acolytes for Trump during the whole 2020, and now, like, they fooling with DeSantis here, right? Now, MAGA definitely has still the clout and pull, for sure, and the influence. So, like, the reality is, right, even DeSantis, like, was to be the nominee, he has to win MAGA, like, and it's not an assumed thing that just because he's a Republican nominee to vote for him, because their loyalty is to Trump, not the Republican Party per se, right? Even though like they're kind of two, but it's not. Now, although DeSantis' campaign has lost a lot of steam, I think he's really trying to set himself up really for 2028. Probably finish term out as governor, rise up within the Republican Party, especially within leadership, put himself in prime position. Now, I will say this much. As someone that lives here in central Pennsylvania, was a very large area, at least of Pennsylvania itself, was real close in the last election. Biden got it, but 2016, Trump won, right? And Pennsylvania, outside of the major cities, is very, very rural, okay? So I was talking to some of my friends who were Republicans, and I had a conversation. Interesting enough, I went to a little lobbyist group, and these conservative Republicans, and a lot of them were former Trump supporters and current Trump supporters, but a lot of them were also talking about DeSantis. And it wasn't really the fact of DeSantis a better candidate. They were saying with Trump, though, is that like some of the things that they got tired with is that, for some of the things that Trump said he was going to do, he didn't do, right? And I think part of the problem is, even with the whole election fraud thing, is that I saw my buddy, he does polling, okay? And he does actual canvassing, volunteer canvassing work, right? So he went down to Georgia, okay, after election, national election, right? And Trump was saying the whole election stolen stuff in Georgia down there, and how there's because Kemp wasn't certified election, how it's election fraud and all the stuff he said, right? And he said he went door to door down there. He saw that a lot of even Republican workers down there were discouraged to go vote. He said, in fact, that like when Trump told them not to go vote, they didn't go for Senate, right? So that's how Republicans lost those Senate seats, okay, with Purdue and owner of the Dream got her to paint because. Again, people, the vote was drained because Trump drained the whole Republican vote. This is coming from me, from my own actual Republican surrogates telling me this, right? So I would say keep that in mind. Again, ultimately though, no one can win without Trump's blessing, quite frankly. So again, like I said, unless legal stuff happens, Trump's gonna be the nominee. Now, there's other people who I think are realistic about they have no shot, but trying to get a cabinet seat or just themselves for a vice presidency role or just their overall brand, right? One of the prime purpose people like this is Vivek Ramsamy. Vivek is an upcoming, young, charismatic Republican commentator, politician. With that being said, to me, Vivek is a very slimy opportunist. He will say anything for votes or people to like him. He's very flip-floppy with his positions. I believe he's a 1% privileged first-generation immigrant American who does not collectively understand America's history and at times is very demeaning and quite frankly out of touch as it communicates with Black American citizens. Vivek is also a very privileged elitist. He's a former George Soros a recipient for a scholarship, fellowship for law school. At the time, it was made for poor immigrants. Vivek himself, who was a big pharmaceutical former executive, was making $700,000 at the time and took that opportunity away from a poor immigrant family. He's an elitist. Vivek is all over the place with things he says. Sometimes he makes some good points, sure. But a lot of times, Vivek is just literally on a bingo card just saying popular rhetoric that conservatives want to hear. Reverse racism is racism. Stop the wars. Stop the vaccines. Anti-big pharma. Anything Trump says. And it's all over the place, right? And for me, Vivek clearly is trying to make a stay for vice presidency, or really just his book, to be honest, that he dropped, trying to get the sales up for it. Vivek is all over the place. At the debate, he was talking about how, we need to stop funding Ukraine, but we need to keep funding billions to Israel, though. And I don't have a stake on either or of those things. It's just that you say one thing for giggles and stuff like that, like stop funding, but then the other ally you want to fund. It's like, well, which one is it? Like, you can't be both. You can't be as one person who's all like, let's stop giving money to a foreign government at the same time, but let's keep giving money to a foreign government. I'm just saying it's pretty hypocritical there in that regard. All over the place again with his views, especially of himself being a large pharmaceutical former executive as well. He also is not a true Republican, hasn't been a registered Republican for years, and he's just doing this opportunist element as well. And especially what turns me off is how he talks about Black Americans, and he talks very demonizing and talks a very low perspective. And quite frankly, you would expect someone who benefited off the Civil Rights Act, especially for the immigration laws that allowed his parents to immigrate to this country because of the sacrifice of Black Americans. And so to continue to talk down on Black American citizens who, without us, your family would never, you wouldn't be in this country, quite frankly. You'd be back in that place you came from, which is India. So, yeah, Vivek, he'll be around, but he's an opportunist. He's a slippery slope. You see, he just bites a lot of politicians' lines. Again, very limited understanding, I think, of America's history, because Black history is American history. And Vivek clearly has shown time and time again he has a very limited understanding of scope of that. And ironically, he talks about having people take citizenship tests to graduate high school. Telling an American citizen to take a citizenship test to graduate high school is disgusting. We're an American citizen. Why do I have to take that test to graduate high school? No, stop. Okay. And with that being said as well, Vivek also doesn't understand a lot of American history, so I bet we give him an African American history quiz, he would fail that because American history, and it's told from a very limited perspective. So Vivek, you don't get to come in our country, and when I say come in our country, I understand you're a first-generation American, your parents came to this country, but what I say is that oftentimes you don't share the same rhetoric that other fellow Americans seem to have, and you talk from a very dog-whistling perspective. And again, as a Black American citizen whose family has fought and goes back to the Civil War, who were Buffalo Soldiers in every single war ever since then. From my understanding, Vivek's family has never sacrificed an ounce of blood for this country, has never fought in a single war or military for this country. In fact, have benefited off the sacrifices that many Black Americans have made so his family could immigrate here. With that being said, I just discussed it, that when he comes with this attitude to talk down on Black American citizens, you need to stop, Vivek, because I understand you got a dog whistle for those white-brain conservatives, but understand, so you're still brown to them. I know you may hate that or not acknowledge that, but you are, and they'll always see you as that, and you'll never be them. And so that's my take on Vivek. I think he's a very, again, smart individual, right? I think he knows a lot. I think he's charismatic, all that, but also very, very limited with his knowledge and information. And in fact, he's scared and ducking a lot of Black conservatives who want to debate him on many of the topics he's talking about. Shout out Sonny Johnson. Vivek, debate Sonny Johnson. Stop running from it. So, with that being said as well, there are only 3 people who are truly even polling the higher numbers. After that, you got Nikki Haley, former governor of South Carolina. I think she had a really good take at the primaries. She showed a lot of good takes, actually, and kind of like proved her profile a little bit. So that helped her out a lot. However, again, all these people are like former Trump acolytes, so it's kind of like they kind of flip-flop. So she was a former on Trump's administration, his cabinet, but then like now she's like anti-Trumper. So it's like, all right, well, but again, former governor of South Carolina, so shout her out. My guy Tim Scott, one of our 3 Black American senators that we have in our entire country. Again, out of 100 senators, only 3 are Black, and Tim Scott is the only Republican. I like Tim Scott. That's my guy. South Carolina, I think Tim's could be a rising star. Unfortunately, Tim, I don't think you're going to win this primary. The reality is, in the South, they don't really play the whole being a bachelor thing. Tim Scott's been, he's a bachelor. He's not married, not have kids, not a family. And just collectively, politics and aesthetics, I know it's shallow. I know it's not really has to have family at all. I'm not saying that, but politically speaking, that kind of goes along to it. I think Tim Scott generally does get it right. I think talking about efforts in America, you should look at his work, especially the criminal justice reform he did as well. Tim Scott led a bipartisan bill. So he does, as a Black senator, I think he recognizes a Black man. I think he does recognize at times that what's happening in the country. Again, of course, he's a Republican and conservative, so he's going to have those viewpoints and everything. But for me, Tim Scott does understand it. And I hope Tim Scott the best. I hope he keeps rising in his campaign here. A lot of money that he has to stay in the race and everything like that. I don't know if that moves into a cabinet position for Tim Scott or something more VP. I hope maybe a cabinet position if somehow, some way, that, again, if we're Republican nominee wins the presidency as a whole, but we'll see. But yeah, Tim Scott. Then we get down to Chris Christie and Mike Pence. Chris Christie, former governor of New Jersey, just a large anti-Trumper. That's pretty much all the relevancy is, quite frankly. Chris Christie did the whole thing in 2016, run for president, failure in that regard. I know he's been a big anti-Trumper since, so I know Democrats love him. Put him on CNN, MCC. Look, you could literally be Emperor Thrawn, okay, and lead the Empire of Star Wars, okay, and be Darth Vader's right-hand man. But if you're anti-Trump, you will be applauded and given a show on CNN. Okay, it doesn't matter who you are. It's kind of annoying, quite frankly, but it is what it is. But he has no chance. And then Mike Pence, former vice president. for Mike, of course, when he announced the campaign, he had some flames going to him. Did a nice interview with 60 Minutes, talking about how the day of the quote-unquote insurrection, January 6th, how he did the right thing, and he unified the country and put country over party, and I'll commend Mike Pence for that. In all seriousness, Mike Pence did the right thing January 6th, right? He certified the election as vice president, right? He adhered to our Constitution. And I know it's tough. I know everything's so partisan, but it has to happen. We have to always put this country over partisanship. We have to. And I commend Mike Pence for that, right? It's a tough thing to do because he knew what that meant for himself and the political element too, and all the backdrop, but he did the right thing, right? So as a politician, as a servant to the country, we commend you, Mike Pence. Outside of that, Mike Pence, you have no chance of getting near the presidency. You're not getting near the presidency. He has very extreme views that I can't get jiggy with. And it's not happening there. I know you had a big back and forth with Vivek there. Mike Pence, again, he's still part of the old guard Republican Party. You know what I'm saying? And him falling with Trump, and Trump's based with MAGA, there's no way he's supporting Mike Pence in that regard. But he's running, so we'll see how long that lasts for. Like I said, ultimately, I think Trump will be the nominee unless some type of legal stuff literally takes him out that way. And that probably Trump versus Biden again, potentially. Right now, it's close in all the polls. A lot of polls have Trump leading Biden in a lot of polls. And in some polls, Biden leading Trump. So we'll see how that plays out. But I'm just telling you, Trump's the nominee again. It's going to get strong. I'll tell you that much. I think a lot of the moderates, independent that vote for Biden in 2020, which won the election, will be potentially swing back to maybe voting Trump in some regard. A lot of stuff can play out, especially legal stuff with Trump as well too, and how he gets out of that. And especially from a just ethical moral level, but also just from a PR standpoint. But I think MAGA is 10 toes with him right now, where it doesn't matter what happens because it's portrayed as kind of like a witch hunt. It's portrayed as unjust government, and it's portrayed as a politically motivated element. A lot of people in the Republican Party have been echoing those sentiments. Again, no one's above the law, but in some regard, they're kind of right. It is definitely politically motivated. Now, granted, did you do this stuff maybe wrong? Sure, maybe, but we'll see what happens with that. I think as a whole that as we move these primary season, I think it's good to have debates. It's good to have dialogue. I think the Democratic Party should have a debate. They should definitely have a debate. Open that dialogue up. Be open-minded to third-party candidates. I know people who are partisan are already grinding in their teeth and in their chair and are ready to blame them. But guess what? As an independent, I don't care what you think. I say it respectfully and disrespectfully in that regard, right? I'm going to vote for who I think is the best candidate and the best policy. My ancestors fought for me to have the choice to vote. The choice to vote. And there's nothing you can do to ever bully, shame me, or guilt me into voting for a candidate that doesn't represent me. So with that being said as well, that is the unique element of having independent thought. So there's some primary stuff going on right here. We'll see what happens moving forward. The Dem side, we'll see if RFK Jr. can get any more share out of Biden's vote, or more importantly, take some share out of Trump's vote, where he does get a lot of Trump supporters as well too, right? Some of the moderates. It'll be interesting to see as well. Ultimately, we'll see who's the nominee going to be on the Democratic side. I think Biden needs a campaign. I need a platform. Just keep in mind for different surrogates, people out here who will be reporting different information on these different candidates here. We'll see what shakes out, especially your Republican candidacy here. The pool will start slowly falling in on themselves, especially as we get closer and closer into the fall, into the real campaign season here. But yeah, that's my take on the primaries from both the Democratic, Independent, and Republican side here. I appreciate you tuning in. Again, don't always agree with everything I say here today, and that's cool. That's jiggy. Just check it out. Make sure you have an open mind, and just make sure you do your research yourself here. All right, we need more youthful thought, information, and good ideas going in our country. So let's get new energy in here. You heard? All right, yo. Appreciate you tuning in today. Stay tuned. Check out next week's episode. Stay safe. Stay at peace. Stay connected.